Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new Ace in a Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing the Firefly F Mark I. This is a British Naval fighter coming at a tier of 3 and a battle rating of 3.7. To provide you with a brief historical overview as to the origins behind the Firefly up to this iteration depicted on screen, we begin thus. In March of 1939, the British Air Ministry issued two specifications for naval fighter reconnaissance aircraft. The first, N839, was a two-seat fighter aircraft with forward-firing armament. The second was N939, the same type of plane, with a dorsal turret for armament, alike the Bolt and Pull Defiant. Fairey was one of the 5 manufacturers to respond to these specifications, and by the summer of 1940, combat experience had shown that the usage of turret fighters was a bad idea, based on the low success rate of the Bolt and Pull Defiant in this role. The specifications were therefore tweaked, with the two fighter reconnaissance aircraft being asked for being the following: N540, a two-seat fighter with forward-firing armament, being retained from the N839 specification, and a plane that needed to reach a top speed of 345 miles per hour or 555 kilometers an hour, and the other now being N1140, whereby this was a single-seater able to reach a top speed of 380 miles per hour or 611 kilometers an hour, and this contract would go to Blackburn with their Firebrand design. Meanwhile, the two-seat fighter would go to Fairey's Firefly design, as formed by H.E. Chaplin. The Air Ministry ordered 3 prototypes, 10 development aircraft and 187 production aircraft as of the 12th of June 1940. Chaplin's all-metal design featured folding elliptical wings that housed 4 20mm Hispano cannon, 2 to each wing, as mounted in a low position either wing with respect to the main fuselage. The plane was initially powered by the Rolls-Royce Griffon 2B V12 engine, providing 1,730 horsepower. The pilot's cockpit was located over the leading edge of the wings, whilst the observer's cockpit was located just behind the trailing edge of the wings. The cockpits were separate from each other, and the first prototype, Z1826, flew for the first time as of the 22nd of December 1941 to rather positive results, and as a result, performance trials started at Boscombe Down at the end of April 1942. The success of the Boscombe Down trials soon gave way to deck landing trials in the spring of 1943, where pilots criticised the landing visibility due to low canopy and windshields of the aircraft, and this was rectified for the production aircraft. The plane entered production then with the F Mark I, F standing for fighter, by June of 1943, entering operational service on board HMS Indefatigable in July of 1944. With the Mark I being the main variant during the Second World War, it saw service in both the European and Pacific theatres of operation, including supporting Operation Mascot on the 17th of July 1944, one of the Royal Naval Air Force's many attacks on the battleship Tirpitz, i.e. the German battleship. The last 334 Mark I's had their engines uprated to the Griffon 12 1990 horsepower engine, and a total of 459 Mark I fighters were to be built. These were followed by a total of 376 fighter reconnaissance Mark I's, designated FR Mark I, whereby they fielded the ASH radar system for this type of operation. Turning the page, the Mark I would remain in service up to the end of the war, being replaced with the Mark IV as of July 1946. On evaluation, with its initial top speed, i.e. with the original Griffon 2B engine, of 314 miles per hour or 505 kilometers an hour, at 14,000 feet or 4,267 meters altitude, the Firefly Mark I was not going to be a great daytime fighter, despite its tight turn circle and good overall handling characteristics, but it was to prove itself as a good long-range escort fighter and a night fighter. And with our historical overview concluded, let us take a look at how the F Mark I handles in War Thunder's arcade mode. For today's gameplay, we're on the ground strike map Spain using the following setup. Air target belts are our 20mm cannon, reasoning being that these are the most powerful belts available to this aircraft. Consisting in equal measure of high explosive fragmentation incendiary and high explosive fragmentation semi-armour piercing incendiary rounds, we'll be able to cut apart any foe that crosses our crosshair rather rapidly, and if we do not kill them outright, we have a very good chance of setting them on fire in our limited burst, causing them to burn to death gradually. On top of this, we must consider, when trying to sneak up on our foes, we do not have any traces attributed to our rounds, meaning that when we open fire, if they are unaware of our presence, and we happen to miss, they may continue to be unaware of our presence due to the lack of tracers whizzing past their cockpit. For our gun convergence, we are using a 300 meter gun convergence in order to conserve ammunition. We only have a total of 240 rounds, or 60 per gun, meaning that we need to make the most of every round we fire, as we may not be able to get a reload off before we go into our next encounter. Therefore, a tighter convergence and closer range engagements are going to be the order of the day, or at least in my personal experience. For a fuel load setting, we will be using our 45-minute fuel load, as it is the lowest we can take on this aircraft and enough to make it to the end of the game unscathed on fuel capacity. Now let us begin our analysis by taking a look at the ammo capacity of this aircraft and how limited it really is. We dive down on the beam here of an unsuspecting Messerschmitt 19 F2, cutting them apart for our first kill. But more importantly, notice how we expended roughly 40% of our ammunition there, whereby we missed at first, and as we got towards our convergence, we started hitting the target rather rapidly. We have now had to go for a reload, and it goes to show how quickly we can expend our ammunition on a target, how inaccurate fire can really cost us in the long haul. Having finished off our reload, we'll be going into a reverse climb here in order to hit an SM-79 just above us to our rear, whereby we're going to show how powerful our 20mm cannon are against a lightly armoured bomber, ripping apart this SM-79 for our second kill and hitting our stall, calling it rather close. At our stall speed of 130 km an hour, with stall effects coming in at roughly 155 km an hour, we now come around into the midst of a dive, breaking into our next engagement, whereby there is a furball going on below us and we want to try and equalise it, or at least pick off one or two foes before the furball ends in the enemy's favour. This KR-44 is going to be a difficult target if they turn underneath us, so we're going to hit the Spitfire Mark IIA instead, who is trying to loop out and expose their belly. We then try to carry our momentum through onto a Spitfire Mark IIB here, but unfortunately we only scratch them, due to the weak high-speed controllability of the Firefly Mark I, but more on that in a sec. And then we just carry our momentum through here on a Messerschmitt 19, providing a surveillance role, as a friendly Focke 190A is going to try taking them out, and will do so successfully shortly. Now let us talk about the controllability of the Firefly Mark I in general. At its ideal speed of 225 to 375 km an hour, this plane is not exceptional. It will not be picking up any awards at its battle rating and tier for the best rudder response, the best elevator response, or the best roll rate, or even the best turn circle. Instead, it is average in all regards. The rudder takes a little bit of time before it kicks in, but once it is active, you will find that this plane handles rather nicely on its rudder. It is not the most powerful rudder, that would go to the likes of say a Zero, but it is enough to enable you to get this plane around in a flat turn or via a hammerhead, or just add the rudder in to make your turns a little bit tighter in the midst of a 1 versus 1 engagement. The same applies for the elevator. It takes some time in responding, but once it responds, it is rather nice, and you can loop this plane quite tightly, as tight as say that of a Spitfire, but not as tight as say an F2A Buffalo. So you do have the ability to use a vertical loop in order to cause your opponents to overshoot in the midst of a turn fight, or if they're coming faster on your 6 via a boom and zoom engagement. As for your roll rate, this is your weakest control surface, although not by a huge margin. Your roll rate is a little bit behind that of the likes of an A6M2 Model 11, which we reviewed last week, and that review is available to you using the link in the top right corner of your screen, as displayed now. Your roll rate is rather poor, just falling below average, and therefore once you have rolled in a certain directionality, you need to commit. It is very difficult to roll the plane the other way to try and change up your directionality of turn. And as for your turn circle again is rather average. This plane can turn rather nicely when it is at a bit of speed, i.e. at speeds in excess of 400 km an hour, whereby you can turn as tightly as the Yakovlev Yak 7B. But as your speed drops and drops, you will find that your turn circle becomes a little bit more extrapolated, moving more towards the likes of a J2 M2 when you hit speeds of approximately 275 km an hour or lower. And as we move into our next engagement here, we use another diving pass to take out an enemy Spitfire, before breaking over the top of a Yak 9T coming towards us and coming around to try and get a shot. Now here again, notice how when we miss, we are wasting a lot of ammunition, and we head on to a bow fighter here, who decides not to go into a head-to-head with us, costing them their life, And we finish off this Yak 9T with our 20 remaining cannon rounds, picking up a critical hit which detonates their fuel tank essentially and causes them to burn to death very rapidly. And this just goes to show you how powerful the 20mm cannon are with the air target belts. We achieved exactly what we said in our brief. If we cannot kill our opponent outright, we will set them on fire to cause them to burn to death with a high probability, and that was depicted there. So now in that dive once again, what about our controllability at high speed? Well, the controllability of the Firefly Mark 1 at high speeds is very weak. Above 450 km an hour, quite a low threshold, you will find that your control surfaces begin to lock up rather rapidly, in all three domains equally, whereby when you hit your maximum limit of 650 km an hour for the lock-up, you will find that your controllability is reduced to 1/3 of that you are used to at your ideal speed range, discussed earlier. Therefore it can be rather difficult to boom and zoom opponents, so you need to make short distance dives. Or if you are going for a long distance dive where you know your end speed will exceed 650 km an hour, and this plane can dive at speeds in excess of 750 km an hour in the end, you need to try and predict the path of your foes. And we're going to see that again in a minute. As we level out here, what about the climb rate? Well, this goes hand in hand with the dive capabilities, whereby the climb rate of the Firefly Mark 1 is rather poor, especially by comparison with its battle rating and tier contemporaries. A small historical note added on to earlier. The climb rate of this plane, when first evaluated, was found to be 10.8 meters per second at an altitude of 1000 meters approximately. That is reflected in game quite noticeably, whereby this plane will struggle to get to its altitudes in excess of 5000 meters well before the likes of a P-63 King Cobra and a Messerschmitt 19 F4. It will fall behind the likes of a Yakovlev Yak 1 and that of a Spitfire Mark 2B, and it will fall behind the likes of an A6M2 simply because it cannot sustain its climb over a longer period of time. So this leaves you in a rather awkward position. But here as we dive down on the Corsair, notice how we predict their path at a longer distance, knocking them apart on the limit for another kill, and then we try to bleed our speed when going after the I-153 here, in order to make sure we can line up a shot as they turn across us to pick up a double strike. And this is where we come onto the fact you need to try and control your situations. You need to be able to try and set up the situation so that way you get the cleanest shot on target and then can disengage before your opponent knows you were even there. And it is highly unlikely the Corsair or the Chaika knew we were coming, or if they did, they were not prepared to be able to deal with us predicting what they were going to do. And this brings us back to our climb rate. We can go to altitude, but our opponents are going to predict that. If we go to altitude, we put all of our cards in the hands of our opponents. We have a weak climb rate. We can perform at altitudes all the way up to 5000 meters, but our opponents will have superior engine power at this point. Not because our engine has lost its performance, but we just do not have the raw power. This plane is heavy, it is a naval fighter, and even though it is powered by the Griffin engine, a very powerful engine historically, that power is mitigated by our overall mass, and it means that the straight line acceleration of this plane, even its ideal altitude space of 1,500 to 3,500 meters altitude, is rather weak. This plane takes a lot of time, as we are seeing here, in getting its speed up in excess of 350 km an hour, and takes quite a bit of time even getting up to 300 km an hour from its stall. So why would we want to go play up at higher altitudes where our opponents will be able to accelerate to speeds in excess of 500 km an hour a lot faster than we can even get to 300, let alone 400 km an hour? Excuse me. And what is noticeable is that to get to the top speed of this plane, which is just in excess of 500 km an hour in game, you're going to have to use a lot of war emergency power. And at lower altitudes, you will find that this plane will cap out its speed at just above 380 km an hour, which is very, very difficult to reach, even with the usage of war emergency power, especially at altitudes below 500 meters. So here we are controlling our speed, coming onto the back of the Aerocobra for a second time, having slightly messed up our first pass, and we do that via the usage of a small loop over, whereby this plane bleeds its speed rather rapidly for exacerbated manoeuvres. Sharp turns will cut your speed very quickly, and this is a brilliant way of causing your opponents to overshoot, much like a loop as discussed earlier. And by making sharp manoeuvres in the midst of a dive, you can cut 100 km an hour speed, no problem. And we did that there to hit the Aerocobra, and that's how you can control your dive speed. So essentially at this point, what are we saying? Well, the plane style of the Firefly Mark 1 is rather interesting, because what we have described would say that this plane fits in nowhere. It can't go to altitude as rapidly as everyone else, so it's not a bomber hunter, but it has 4 20mm cannon and enough rounds to bring down bombers. It has the potency, therefore. Likewise, it has the potency to go into a turn fight, so long as you do not make too many exacerbated manoeuvres, because the plane does not have the acceleration to be able to stay in the fight for a long period of time. But what is interesting is the fact, despite the poor high-speed dive capability of this plane, it works rather well in that situation, so long as you only put roughly 500 to 1000 metres distance between you and the target you are diving on. If you can do that, or alternatively extend this out to 1500 metres but control your speed in the dive, then you'll find this plane will work rather well, because you can cut through your foes and rip them to pieces. And when you want to go for that 1 versus 1, you have the capability to do so, as long as you pick on foes that do not have superior manoeuvrability in all regards, such as the Hurricane Mark IIC, either the Sea Hurricane or the A6M2. So we're already seeing how this plane can come back into a world of its own, and unfortunately we do not have any 1 versus 1s today to demonstrate this, but what we do have is a brilliant demonstration of the durability of the Firefly here, where we take a number of 50 cal rounds from the P63A10 King Cobra and we just fly past them and knock them out. Then picking up a double strike on a Focke-Wulf 190A1, going into another dive once again, and now we just break away. Because at the end of the day, we are not going to retain our speed, and sharp manoeuvres in the midst of that furball means we would not be able to escape with a lack of speed, lack of straight line acceleration, and it is highly likely we'll get cut apart. Because the thing is, you can play in the furball with this plane, but when you're in the midst of a furball, unless you have friendly supporting you, you will not be able to escape. You'll be trapping yourself to the whim of your opponents, and unless you can get every one of them in your gun sights before they can get you in their gun sights, you are going to be very exposed. But this plane is rather durable. We've seen how it's taken some 50 cal rounds, and this plane can take a good number of 20mm cannon rounds. And on top of that, sometimes your opponents will get so frustrated, or at least in my experience, that they will try and ram you out the skies, and even then, this plane can still hold together. And with its very powerful landing flap, you can balance this plane out when you've lost your tail control surface rather nicely and get it home. Something I've been able to personally do with this plane. And as we go to show the plane at stall here, notice how well this plane stalls out. We hit our stall speed of 130 km an hour, and we just kick the rudder in. The plane levels out very nicely here and regains its composure instantaneously, so stalling out is not too much of a problem, and we can control the plane via flat rudder turns with no problem whatsoever. But here we're just distancing ourselves from the engagements. Reason being, we need to seize opportunities, and that's it in a nutshell really, when we think about it. We are seizing opportunities when we pick up our kills. We are already playing as more of a second line fighter as depicted. At no point have we really taken the initiative. At no point have we created scenarios for us. Perhaps the Messerschmitt 19 F2 and the SM79 kills at the start were scenarios where we took the opportunities, we took the initiative. But otherwise we're just waiting for opportunities to appear and then we will jump on them. We are waiting for our allies and our opponents to set up scenarios for us. And this means we're playing more of a support fighter. And this is exactly, if we look back at our history, what the Firefly was going to be known for, being that plane which provided escort roles. And we're doing that here. We are providing support and escorting our allies in being able to take on situations on the battlefield. Perhaps not as tightly and guarding our opponents perhaps, as the word escort would entitle, but we're doing something in a similar vein. And playing this alongside a squad is going to be quite profitable because you have the firepower to bear to bring down enemy fighters and bombers very rapidly, by comparison with the firepower available to a good number of the planes at your battle rating and tier. Now unfortunately it looks as though our team's lost a good number of planes, but fortunately the game comes to its end and we can now look at the post-game stats. With our 11 kills, we were able to pick up 25,670 Silver Lions and 1,443 research points. To defeat the Firefly F Mark I, I can recommend 2 approaches based on its overall average performance for its battle rating and tier, and these approaches are dependent on what planes you are flying. If you are flying a plane which is more based around its manoeuvrability for success, such as the Spitfire Mark 5B, the A6M2 Raisin, and the I-16 Type 27 Ishak, now I would recommend luring the Firefly into a 1 versus 1 turn fight or a dogfight based around manoeuvrability rather than straight line performance. Reason being, you will be able to manoeuvre with, at the very least, the Firefly at the start of the dogfight, and the longer and longer it goes on for, the more the dogfight will swing in your favour. Simply because the Firefly has the weaker power to mass acceleration, i.e. the ability to build up speed between manoeuvres. Meanwhile, you'll be able to build up enough speed to continue to make the same manoeuvres approximately as what you did previously. The Firefly pilot may find this is no longer feasible, and as a result they will either need to commit to very basic manoeuvres such as gradual turns, or alternatively level out for longer periods of time to build up their speed, and that is where you will get onto their 6 and knock them out accordingly. The alternative approach, if you are flying a plane more based around its engine performance and its ability to get to altitude fast, i.e. outclimb the Firefly essentially, planes such as the Messerschmitt 1 and F4, the P-38G Lightning and the LA-5, is simply to outclimb it and force it to stall in your wake, as the climb rate of the Firefly is rather weak by comparison, and albeit you need to be aware of its stall speed of 130 km an hour and its fast stall recovery, you should be able to force this plane to stall out and become an easy target, and if you can bait it up to altitudes in excess of 5,000 metres, you will be laughing eventually. But by avoiding these two scenarios by taking a more opportunistic approach, we were able to come first by comparison with our team in our own Firefly F Mark I today. But we should emphasise we had to play every situation as it appeared. We did not generate the kills that we picked up, instead they were provided to us by the opportunities that were presented by the enemy team and our allies positioning on the map. Therefore one can say, based on the stock experience we had in this aircraft, where its overall acceleration and climb rate were tragic and therefore we had to rely on the situations created by our teammates and act in that second line support role, we've extended this into our playstyle with this plane when it is fully upgraded. And by knowing the limits of this aircraft, we're able to take each situation in hand and exploit it for maximum results. By putting pressure in these situations, we can take our opponents by surprise and show them that the Firefly is not a plane to be underestimated, and it is a very powerful plane when used correctly, whether by yourself or as part of a wider team. And so I've been TX141, and if you've enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder reviews on my channel. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.